Embroidery applique is probably one of my favorite embroidery techniques because I don't have to wait for all the design to fill in with stitches. I can put down fabric, and in one design I could have a pink middle, and on the next design I could have green. So with really just changing out the fabric, it makes it super simple. There are some techniques that go along with embroidery applique. So we are going to do design number 30 from the built-in designs. This design is indicated with the applique symbols in your manual, so we definitely want to do that. And for something I want to show a little later with design positioning, so you can click right up here for design positioning, I'm going to actually move this flower straight down. I'm going to utilize the lower part of my hoop, and then that way I can show you something in a little bit that will show you how we can align something perfectly. Now the reason I'm going and using, instead of just dragging it down, I'm using the arrows, is this way I know I'm still centered, but I'm still, I'm just right in the middle, but all the way at the bottom. Remember, if you ever go outside your hoop, you can always use the put back into hoop feature, so it goes right to the very edge. And we're ready to go to embroidery stitch out. Now, just an idea, just to make sure that the design is going to stitch where I want it to stitch, let's go ahead and go over to the positioning area, and let's check the corners of this design. So at any given time before you stitch, it's a good idea to get an idea, okay, this is how big my design is. I'm not going to stitch over something I might already have on my fabric or in the same vicinity. Or if I want to move to the center of the design and find maybe a position I need to actually be on. So if I wanted the design to be over here, we can go ahead and move it to that location. Once I'm happy with the design and where it's going to stitch, just do the check mark, and we're going to go ahead and get started on the design. So a couple things to note in the manual with the Pfaff Creative 3.0 embroidery machine is if you're looking at any of the symbols that are in here. So they keep them kind of generic since this manual is printed for lots of different countries. But these symbols indicate I'm going to put some fabric down where there's a dot. Okay, so in between color 1 and color 2, I'm going to position fabric. And between color 2 and 3, I'm going to need to do some trimming. So in the front of the book, there are some explanations of kind of what those are. So like, for example, that indicated applique, there's eyelets, there's cutwork, there's freestanding designs, there's chenille, and also the thread velvet. So those techniques are found in these designs throughout the book. So if I looked over here at this design, I do see that there is those same symbols. So even though you can't see it, is the fabric behind the, right in the circle, that is where the applique is going to go. I'm guessing because of where the location is. And the satin stitch is orange. That's going to go over the raw edge once it's actually stitched. So if you were looking for applique designs in your book, you're looking for those symbols. So for example, this one is a water soluble or standalone lace design that can be stitched repeatedly. That's why there's an endless hoop pictured here. Oh my gosh, there's so much in here. Have fun with your built-in designs, by the way. So we're ready to stitch, so we're going to go ahead. The first stitching is what's called a placement line. So you can go ahead, you can match your thread to the fabric you're going to use, but really just go ahead and get the first line stitched out. This will give us an idea of how big of an area we need to cover with our fabric. So I can see that this fabric will easily cover up all those little areas. Those are going to be the first petals that are stitched. So we're just going to go ahead, stitch this next step. This is going to go ahead and pretty much repeat those same lines as stitching all the way around. But when this is done, and you're going to notice, do you see it stitching 2 times over that area? That means that after this, when it stitches twice, that's when you can trim really close to that edge. So 1 time around means it's just a, hey, by the way, this is where your fabric goes. 2 times around means this is where you're actually going to be cutting, and it's a little bit more secure. So once it's done stitching each of these petals all the way around, I'm going to go ahead and take the hoop off, and then I'll show you some trimming tips. Next, you want to go ahead and take the hoop off. And let me show you quick. If you are finding the items you're having to trim around are not really hard to get your scissors, you remember you have what is called a cut position. Cut position will move the hoop to you, and then here, if you can go ahead and kind of work your hands around those shapes. I'm going to be able to work to get to some of these, but not like every single direction. So that's why taking the hoop off for this particular design is going to be a lot easier. But what you're wanting to do is when you trim, did you see how close I trimmed that design? What you want to do is make sure that your scissors, and I do use curved embroidery scissors because I can kind of push my scissors right up to that stitching line and get nice and close. Then that way your design, when it stitches the satin stitch over the raw edge, it catches it. It doesn't leave any like little whispers sticking out the edges of the design. If I was to finish trimming, all I'd have to do is push the start button and it will go ahead and start into the next color. You don't have to go back to current position. You can just push start. It knows where it left off, which is the awesome part of it. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and take the hoop off. And the fabric is, I should say fabric, the bobbin is still connected. It does not know, or it doesn't cut in between colors. It only cuts at the very end. So if you ever wonder why that thread is not cut for you, that is why. If you wanted it cut, you can actually touch the thread snips before you take the hoop off, and it will cut that bobbin thread. So if you're tired of taking your hoop off and running all this bobbin thread out, that would be one way to solve that particular issue here. So I'm going to just go ahead, trim it, and then I'll show you what it looks like right before we start the next color. I can see on the screen that I'm on color 3 here. And so after step 2, I've trimmed, and then color 3 is going to stitch another placement because now I have to put fabric after this. So this little flower actually has kind of 2 layers of fabric. So you can see where it did the leaves that are around there, and now we're going to do the middle part. So let's just go ahead. It's going to stitch another placement line all the way around those other flowers, and then I'll take another piece of fabric. Nope, I was wrong. This is actually going to do our satin stitch, actually, and probably a placement. So we're going to kind of get a 2-for-1 in this particular round. And that's why you want to stitch out some of the designs ahead of time. So just in case something like this surprises you and you're like, oh, wait, it's going to do a satin stitch. I wanted a different color at this time. You'll know that that would have been a choice that you could have made if you'd known the order a little bit better. Sometimes it's hard to tell by just looking at the picture what it's going to stitch at each particular time. So I'm going to go ahead, let this stitch. We'll see the placement come up after. I bet it does all the satin stitches. You can tell there's one of the placement lines right here. After it stitches this, we'll put another piece of fabric down. It'll stitch a new flower in the middle, and then we'll trim it a second time. This would be a great place to put a second fabric color in here, but since the original picture had the same fabric, I am going to just kind of copy that. Again, I just need to make sure that I'm covering up the placement stitches, so I can kind of bring it close down to the corner here so I don't use up too much fabric, and then we'll just go ahead and start it again. This will go around those 2 times placement. That way I will be able to trim nice and close to the fabric. Notice that I usually don't put any spray adhesives. If anything, I might just kind of hold the fabric. If you're unsure, you can use some of the embroidery tape that holds the edges down so your fingers and hands aren't near the needle. But just in case things want to move at all, that tape is your best friend. So you'll see it'll go around 2 times here. And once it's stuck, we'll trim it and then we'll finish up the design. We can see that the last part of the applique is the satin stitch that goes around the last flower we added. On the picture though, it shows all the same color from the satin stitch we did earlier to the 7th color, which is the final satin stitch. I'm thinking of changing it up. We just did the purple part here. I'm thinking we just go ahead and hit go and let the last flower be purple. So let's see how fun this will turn out. I really like the way the purple turned out and brought this flower to life. I think if I had used my original pink, it would have kind of been a little washed out. So remember, contrast is your friend, and it really is a fun way to pop a design off fabric. And look how much time we saved by putting our fabric in instead of having it stitch all the fill stitches out. And now you know why I love applique embroidery.